The glass wall behind Adrian Vale reflected a city washed pale by rain, its towers broken into trembling lines by the water sliding down the window. Across the conference table, 12 executives waited for him to speak. Their documents lay open. Their tablets glowed. Their expressions remained carefully neutral beneath the pressure of his silence. No one interrupted Adrian when he went quiet. They had learned, over the years, that his pauses were rarely empty. He was looking at the folder placed before him, not at the projected numbers, not at the acquisition schedule, not at the risk assessment that had kept 3 departments awake for 2 weeks. At the folder. The paper was ordinary, thick, expensive, faintly textured beneath his thumb. The consultant from Rowan Strategic had just handed it over with both hands, polite and precise, saying the revised terms were inside. The scent should have been ink, rainwater, and the faint trace of the bergamot soap used by the building's guest washrooms. Instead, beneath everything else, Adrian caught something so weak it almost wasn't there. Winter cedar after fire. His fingers stopped moving. 6 years had taught him not to trust ghosts. Grief had a smell if one lived with it long enough. Stale rooms, cold coffee, the metallic edge of sleeplessness. Desire also had a smell, though it changed once it became obsession. It no longer came as heat. It came as memory sharpening itself against bone. The consultant stood at the end of the table, head slightly lowered, dark lashes casting a soft shadow beneath his eyes. He wore a charcoal suit without a visible brand, tailored to make him disappear among men who used wealth as armor. His hair was longer than corporate fashion allowed, tied low at the nape. Thin silver glasses softened a face that would otherwise have been too composed. His name, according to the file, was Elias Rowan. Adrian turned a page. Your revision reduces our projected control over the South Harbor assets by 7%, he said. His voice broke the room open. Several people breathed again. The consultant lifted his eyes. Yes, Elias said. His English was clean, without hesitation, because your original projection assumes influence you do not legally possess. One of Adrian's directors frowned. Influence is not always written into law. No, Elias replied, but lawsuits are. A flicker moved through the room. Not amusement, interest. He had not spoken loudly, yet every person at the table shifted as if he had placed a knife beside the contract. Adrian watched him over the rim of his lowered gaze, calm under pressure, measured, not arrogant, not timid. Someone who had learned when to cut and when to leave the blade unseen. Adrian closed the folder. Explain. Elias did not look at the directors. He looked only at Adrian. And for one breath, the rain against the glass seemed to disappear. 6 years ago, someone else had looked at him like that from across a darker room, carrying fear behind stubborn dignity, making Adrian want to reach out and making him fail to do so. Then Elias turned toward the screen. The moment broke. The South Harbor family trusts are fractured into 3 legal branches. Your team accounted for 2. The third was transferred into a private foundation 16 months ago, which means any attempt to consolidate voting rights through the usual channels will trigger review. If you proceed as written, the acquisition may still succeed, but the board will inherit a dispute instead of an asset. He spoke for 7 minutes. No wasted words, no performance. He moved through the documents like someone crossing thin ice with full awareness of every crack. Adrian listened, face unreadable, while the rest of the room slowly understood that Rowan Strategic had not been hired to decorate their decision. They had been hired because someone outside Vale Group had noticed what Vale Group had missed. When Elias finished, silence settled again. The CFO cleared his throat. Mr. Val, We can request another analysis before. No. Adrian kept his eyes on Elias. We'll use Mr. Rowan's structure. The director who had frowned earlier stiffened. With respect, changing the structure now gives an outside consultant significant leverage over a major, family-linked asset. Elias lowered his gaze to the papers, as if the comment had nothing to do with him. Adrian leaned back. Then perhaps we should avoid needing outsiders to find our blind spots. No one spoke after that. The meeting continued for another 23 minutes. Adrian approved 3 revisions, rejected 2, and asked Elias 4 questions designed not to test the proposal, but the man. Elias answered all of them without reaching beyond what he could prove. He never overplayed his knowledge. He never volunteered personal context. When challenged, his expression did not harden. It emptied. That emptiness irritated Adrian more than resistance would have. At Patru Chinjizech Shishapte, Elias gathered his documents. Mr. Rowan, Adrian said. Elias's hand paused above the folder. The room was half standing. Chairs drawn back. Assistants already approaching with coats and tablets. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Stay. The word was simple, in another mouth. It might have been rude. From Adrian. It sounded like an instruction the building itself had decided to obey. Elias looked at him for less than a second. I have another appointment. You're a consultant on a Vale acquisition. Your schedule can accommodate me. My contract states availability within agreed project hours. Elias slid the final document into his briefcase. Those hours end at 5. Someone behind him inhaled too sharply. Adrian stood. He was tall enough that people often mistook height for dominance. But his real pressure came from stillness. He did not crowd rooms. He made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Alphas had always done that in his family. Especially the old bloodlines that treated pheromone control as both inheritance and weapon. Adrian had spent most of his life learning how not to let his presence spill unless he chose it. At that moment, a thread of alpha pressure moved through the conference room. Not enough to threaten, enough to remind. 2 executives lowered their eyes. 1 beta assistant stepped back. Elias did not move. His lashes lifted, and Adrian saw the faintest strain at the corner of his mouth. Not fear, suppression. An Omega would have trembled under that pressure unless trained, medicated, or unusually disciplined. Elias Rowan, whose file marked him as Beta, remained standing with his fingers steady around the handle of his briefcase. Then the scent disappeared. Completely. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Elias gave a polite nod. If there are additional questions, please send them through the project channel. I'll respond tomorrow morning. He left before anyone could decide whether stopping him was worth the risk of being noticed. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Adrian remained standing, one hand resting on the back of his chair. Beyond the glass, evening had thickened over the city. The rain blurred the red brake lights below into long wounds of colour. Mr. Vale, the CFO said carefully. Adrian looked down at the folder again. On the first page, beneath the printed proposal title, Elias had made a small correction in blue ink. The handwriting was controlled. Narrow, slightly angled left. Not identical. Of course not. 6 years could change handwriting. Fear could change posture. Survival could change a face. But memory was cruel in the details it kept. A man half asleep against white sheets. One hand curled near his mouth. A voice hoarse from exhaustion saying, "Don't look at me like that." Rain beyond a hotel window. The trembling warmth of a body that had leaned into his for one night and vanished before dawn. Adrian closed the folder with too much care. "Cancel my evening schedule," he said. The CFO did not ask why. By the time Adrian returned to his private office, Elias Rowan had already passed through the lobby. Security records showed him leaving alone. Black umbrella opened before he stepped onto the pavement. He did not look back at the building. The camera caught only his profile for 3 seconds, pale cheek, lowered eyes, mouth set in a line too practiced to be natural. Adrian replayed it once. Then again. His office occupied the top floor, separated from the executive level by a private elevator and 2 security checkpoints. Most people found it cold. Adrian had never cared enough to correct them. The room was designed in black stone, smoked glass, and dark wood, with no photographs except one turned face down inside a locked drawer. A person could live in that office for years and leave no emotional evidence behind. He opened the drawer. The photograph inside had faded slightly along one edge. It was not intimate in the way others would expect. A young man slept near a window, wrapped in a white shirt too large for him, hair falling over his eyes. His face was turned away from the camera. Only the curve of his jaw and the loose line of his hand were visible. Adrian had taken it in the grey, hour before morning, when he had still believed there would be time after sleep to ask for a name beyond the one whispered against his shoulder. Ren. That was what the Omega had called himself. Perhaps it had been false from the beginning. Adrian touched the edge of the photograph without lifting it. 6 years of private investigators, sealed hospital inquiries, quiet payments to people who specialized in finding those who did not want to be found. He had searched through scent registries, border records, underground clinics, Omega protection shelters, and false employment chains. He had found frauds, corpse, frightened strangers, and once, a letter written by someone who had used Ren's name to extort money. Never Ren, never even a trace that felt alive. Until today. His phone vibrated. "Speak," Adrian said. His chief security officer, Marcus Hale, did not waste greetings. "You asked us to run a deeper background check on Elias Rowan. Standard file is clean. Too clean." Adrian looked toward the rain-dark glass. How clean. Education records appear verified. But the earliest confirmation is from 5 years and 11 months ago. Employment history begins shortly after that. No childhood records. No family registry. No medical profile prior to the same period. Whoever built this identity knew what they were doing. The office lights reflected faintly in the window, cutting Adrian's face into shadow and gold. Designation: Beta, according to corporate documents. According to medical verification, a pause. We don't have one yet. Adrian's hand closed around the phone. Marcus continued. There's also something else. He leaves work at the same time every day. No exceptions. Route changes often, but destination seems consistent. A private preschool in the old Eastern District. Adrian turned away from the window. A child. We're confirming. The word moved through the room like a door opening somewhere underground. Adrian said nothing. On the other end, Marcus waited. He had served the Vale family long enough to know when silence meant danger and when it meant the past had returned with teeth. Finally, Adrian asked, age. Possibly 5 or 6. The city below seemed to tilt. 6 years. Adrian did not let himself calculate. Calculation was for men who still had distance from the wound. He had none. The possibility came too quickly, too violently. And he rejected it with the same force because hope had made a fool of him before. There had been false leads. There had been resemblance where grief wanted resemblance. There had been nights when he woke thinking he smelled winter cedar and found only the cold side of an empty bed. Continue, he said. Yes. Seer. The call ended. Adrian stood in the center of his office for a long time. Outside, rain struck the glass without mercy. Inside, the air remained perfectly controlled, filtered, temperature balanced, stripped of every human trace except his own. He thought of Elias Rowan standing beneath alpha pressure without lowering his head. He thought of the scent vanishing. He thought of a private preschool in the Eastern District. Then he thought of 6 years ago, of waking to an untouched breakfast tray and a room already emptied of warmth. There had been no note, no accusation, no request, only the absence of someone who had not belonged to him, leaving behind a silence so complete that Adrian had mistaken it for punishment before understanding it was fear. At Cinci, Patruzeci, Chitrei, Adrian's private elevator opened. His grandmother entered without asking permission. Helena Vale was 73 and elegant in the way old families taught their daughters to become beautiful weapons before they became women. Her silver hair was pinned at the nape, her black suit severe, her pearl earrings softening nothing. She had once controlled 3 branches of the Vale family through marriage contracts and inheritance disputes without raising her voice. Adrian did not turn around. "You missed the family council call," she said. "I cancelled it. You postponed it." Helena walked into the office, her cane touching the floor with a quiet rhythm. "There is a difference. The council tolerates your habits because you are useful. Adrian, do not confuse usefulness with freedom." He looked at her reflection in the glass. "Did you need something? The South Harbor acquisition concerns bloodline assets. You should not restructure it without family review. You read fast. I am old, not dead." Adrian finally turned. The original structure was flawed. Then fix it internally. We failed internally. Helena's eyes rested on him, pale and patient. "You sound irritated. That is unlike you." He said nothing. Her gaze moved to the folder on his desk. Not obviously. Helena never looked directly at what interested her. "Rowan, strategic," she said. "A young firm, efficient, unusually private." Adrian watched her. "Did you know them before today?" she asked. "No." It was not a lie, not technically. Helena smiled faintly, which was worse than anger. "Be careful. Private people either protect weakness or conceal appetite. Both are expensive. Is that family wisdom? It is survival." The word landed harder than she knew. Adrian picked up the folder and placed it inside a locked drawer. Not the one with the photograph. Helena noticed the distinction. Of course she did. Her face did not change. But her silence sharpened. "You are nearing 35, she said. "The council will raise the matter of marriage again after this acquisition. They can raise it from their graves if they like. Crude. Honest. Honesty is a luxury for people without inheritance." Helena's cane stopped moving. "You may resent the family, but you are not separate from it. Your children will not be separate from it either." The room grew very quiet. Adrian looked at her. "I have no children." "Not yet." The words should have passed. Instead, they remained between them, polished and poisonous. For the first time that evening, Adrian let a trace of alpha pheromone enter the air. It was controlled, cold, carrying the distant metallic edge of storm-struck stone. Most people would have stepped back. Helena merely lifted her chin. "You forget," she said softly. "I raised your father and buried him." Something flickered in her eyes. Not grief. Irritation at grief being used as evidence. Adrian withdrew the pressure before it became a challenge. "Leave the acquisition to me." "I always do," Helena said, "until you make it personal." After she left, the office felt colder than before. Adrian sat behind his desk and opened the security still of Elias Rowan on his screen. The image was grainy, the angle imperfect. Rain silvered the edge of the umbrella. Elias's face appeared distant, almost blurred, as if even the camera could not hold him with certainty. A message arrived from Marcus. Confirmed child registered as Noah Rowan. Male. Age 5. Guardian. Elias Rowan. No second parent listed. Adrian read the message once. Then he locked the screen. For several seconds, he could hear nothing except the rain and his own pulse. 5 years old. Not proof. Not even close. A child could be adopted. A child could belong to a dead sibling. A hidden partner. A past Adrian had no right to enter. Elias Rowan could be exactly what he claimed, a sharp consultant with a guarded life, and a son who had nothing to do with a vanished Omega named Ren. But Adrian had built an empire by respecting patterns other men dismissed as coincidence. At chasse dois prezeche. He called Marcus again. Do not approach the child. Adrian said, understood. No contact with the school. No visible surveillance. No pressure. A faint hesitation. And Elias Rowan. Adrian looked at the locked drawer. Find out who he was. He said, not who the documents say he is. When the call ended, Adrian remained seated in the dimming office until the automatic lights adjusted around him. He thought of the way Elias had refused to stay after 5. Not disrespect, not inconvenience, necessity. Somewhere below the tower, beyond the polished districts where men like Adrian were treated as weather systems instead of people. Elias Rowan was probably kneeling to help a child into a coat. Perhaps he smiled there. Perhaps the emptiness left his face when no one powerful was watching. Perhaps he had a life so carefully built that Adrian's attention alone could destroy it. The thought should have stopped him. It did not. Near midnight, long after the executive floors emptied, Adrian opened the folder again. He turned to the page Elias had corrected by hand. The blue ink cut through the printed text with quiet certainty. At the bottom of the page, Adrian wrote a single line in the margin, then stopped. He had written without thinking. You always hated being cold. The pen remained in his hand. For the first time in 6 years, Adrian felt something more dangerous than longing. Recognition. The rain had not stopped by morning. It softened the city into a grey, reflective thing, turning office towers into blurred silhouettes and traffic into a slow red current beneath the elevated roads. Elias stood beneath the entrance awning of Vale Tower with his umbrella closed at his side, watching the revolving doors move people in and out with mechanical indifference. For 6 years, he had built his life around exits. He always knew where doors were, which elevators skipped floors, which streets offered crowds, which names could be burned without grief. Vale Tower had too much glass. That was his first thought as he stepped inside. His second was worse. Adrian had once looked at him through morning rain, exactly like this. Elias passed security with a visitor badge and a face trained into professional calm. His suppressants had been adjusted before dawn, the bitter taste still coating the back of his throat. They made his pulse heavy, his fingertips cold. But they erased what needed erasing. Omega scent. Panic. Memory. The doctor who supplied them had warned him that long-term use would damage his body if he continued increasing the dosage. Elias had thanked him, paid in cash, and taken twice as much as prescribed. Survival had never been gentle. The executive assistant waiting near the elevators bowed politely. Mr. Rowan. Mr. Vale has requested that today's working session be held in his private conference suite. Was that in the revised schedule? No. Sir, it was updated this morning. Of course it was. Elias glanced at the elevator display. Private access. No crowded project floor. No shared room. No easy witnesses. Adrian Vale had always understood how space could become pressure. Even 6 years ago, before Elias knew his full name, before the hotel room, before the mistake that had become the center of his life. Adrian had carried the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to closing doors and having the world remain obedient outside them. "I'll need my legal associate present for any material change in project terms," Elias said. The assistant smiled with practiced helplessness. "This is only a technical review." Technical review. Elias almost laughed. Nothing about Adrian Vale was ever only anything. He followed anyway. The private conference suite occupied a corner of the top floor, with one wall of windows and another lined with shelves holding bound contracts instead of books. Adrian stood near the table, already dressed in a dark suit, one hand resting beside an untouched cup of coffee. He did not look as if he had slept. That should not have mattered. Elias had no right to notice the faint shadow beneath his eyes or the slight looseness of his tie. As if some invisible hand had pulled him apart and failed to put him back neatly. "Mr. Rowan," Adrian said. "Mr. Vale." Neither of them offered a hand. The assistant left. The door closed with a soft magnetic seal. Elias placed his briefcase on the table. "Your team requested revisions to the minority trust clause. I requested you." There it was, laid between them without decoration. Elias opened the briefcase with steady fingers. Paper helped. Data helped. Facts were handholds on a collapsing bridge. "My expertise concerns acquisition risk." Adrian watched him. "Is that why you leave at 5 every day?" The question did not strike loudly. It slipped under the ribs. Elias removed a folder and set it down. "My contracted hours are not a secret." "No," Adrian said, "but habits usually have reasons. So do boundaries." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched Adrian's mouth, though it never reached his eyes. "You believe I don't understand boundaries. I believe powerful people often define them only after crossing them." Silence followed. The rain traced restless paths down the windows. Elias heard the blood in his ears and wondered whether Adrian heard it too. Alphas, from old bloodlines, noticed too much. That had been the first danger. The second had been mistaking observation for care. Adrian turned toward the table. "Sit." Elias remained standing for one deliberate second before he complied. It was childish. Perhaps. That tiny refusal to obey immediately. But he allowed himself so few rebellions that even this one warmed his cold hands. They worked for 3 hours. Adrian asked questions, as if each answer gave him not merely corporate information, but a map of Elias himself. He noticed which clauses Elias dismissed quickly, which names made him pause, which branches of the Vale family he avoided mentioning unless necessary. Elias gave nothing without purpose. He corrected assumptions, marked liabilities, and guided the structure away from traps that Adrian's directors had mistaken for opportunities. The work itself became dangerous because it was easy. Adrian was ruthless. But he was not stupid. He followed complex arguments without demanding performance. He did not interrupt to display authority. He listened with a stillness that made Elias remember a different room. Adrian's hand beneath his wrist. Thumb resting over a pulse he had no right to calm. At noon, Adrian's phone lit once on the table. He glanced at it, then turned the screen face down. Elias saw only 2 words before it disappeared. Noah Rowan. The pen in his hand stopped. Adrian noticed. Of course, he noticed. "Your son," Adrian asked. The room did not change. The weather did not pause. No alarm went off. No glass shattered. No hand reached from the past to cover Elias's mouth before he answered incorrectly. Yet for Elias, Everything narrowed to the polished surface of the table and the faint reflection of Adrian's unreadable face. "My nephew," Elias said. The lie came smoothly because it had been prepared for years. It had been practiced in government offices, clinics, rental applications, school forms, and the cautious conversations of neighbors who wondered why a young man with no family carried a child through fever nights alone. Adrian's gaze stayed on him. "Your documents list you as his guardian. My sister died. You have no sister in your file. I also have no obligation to place my entire life in your file." Something moved in Adrian's expression then. Not anger. Pain. Perhaps, if Elias had been foolish enough to name it. The Alpha looked away first, toward the rain. That small mercy unsettled Elias more than interrogation would have. "Children complicate schedules," Adrian said. "They clarify them." Adrian turned back. Elias lowered his eyes to the contract. "Shall we continue?" They did. But the room had changed. Every sentence now carried a second meaning beneath it. Control, guardianship, bloodline, transfer, inheritance rights. Words that belong to legal documents and nightmares alike. Elias crossed out one clause so violently that the paper tore beneath his pen. Adrian looked at the rip. "Careful," he said. Elias replaced the page. "Paper is replaceable." "Not always." Their eyes met. For one suspended moment, Elias saw the question Adrian would not ask. "Who are you? Where did you go? What did you take from me?" Beneath those questions lay another, softer and more dangerous. "Did you suffer?" Elias had no defense against that one. So he stood. "I need to leave early today." Adrian checked the time. "It's 2:30. There's a storm warning. Roads near the Eastern District flood quickly." The explanation was too specific. Elias knew it the instant it left him. Adrian did not comment. "Take my car." "No." It wasn't a request for intimacy. "No," Elias said quietly. "With you. Favors are never only favors." The words struck harder than intended. Adrian's face became still in that particular way. Powerful men went still before deciding whether to wound. Elias waited for it. He almost needed it. Cruelty would simplify everything. It would turn Adrian back into danger and make leaving easy. Instead, Adrian only said, "Then take the covered exit. The front road is blocked." Elias closed his briefcase. His chest hurt. "Thank you. Mr. Rowan." He stopped near the door. Adrian's voice lowered. "Did we know each other before?" The question came so softly that Elias nearly turned as the person he had once been. His hand rested on the door handle. Beneath his palm, the metal was cold. "No," he said. He left before the lie could develop a pulse. By 4, the storm had worsened. Rain hit the pavement in silver sheets, overwhelming drains and turning the lower streets into dark mirrors. Elias's phone vibrated repeatedly as he descended in the elevator. First the weather alert, then a message from Noah's caretaker. Apologetic and frantic, her building had flooded. Buses were suspended. She could not reach the preschool. Elias called 3 backup contacts. One was out of town. One did not answer. One had a feverish child at home. The preschool director's voice remained kind but firm. They were closing early because of the storm, and Noah needed to be picked up immediately. For 5 minutes, Elias stood beneath the covered exit with rain blowing sideways across his shoes and understood that every route he had planned was useless. He took a taxi, paid double, then triple when the driver hesitated at flooded roads. By the time he reached the preschool, his trousers were soaked to the knee and his suppressants had begun to fail under stress. Noah waited in the entry hall with a small yellow raincoat folded over his lap. Solemn among the bright drawings taped to the walls. The moment he saw Elias, his face changed, not dramatically. Noah had learned early not to demand too much from a tired parent. He simply stood, walked over, and slipped his small hand into Elias's. "Papa," he said, "you're cold." Elias crouched and touched his forehead to Noah's for one brief second. "I'm fine." "No, you're doing the voice." "What voice?" "The fine voice." The preschool director pretended not to hear. Elias thanked her, signed the release form, and guided Noah back into the storm. The taxi had left. No rides were available. The nearest subway entrance was closed due to flooding. Elias checked his phone while Noah leaned against his side, quiet and warm and terribly trusting. Then the screen lit with a message from the project channel. "Mr. Rowan, several urgent revisions require your signature before tomorrow's filing deadline. Please return to Vale Tower if possible. Transport can be arranged." No sender name. Elias stared at the message until rain blurred the words. He should have refused. He should have found a hotel. Called in sick. Vanished for 3 days. Burned the contract and everything attached to it. Instead, he looked down at Noah, whose shoes were already wet, whose small fingers tightened whenever thunder rolled above the buildings. "Do you remember our rule?" Elias asked. Noah nodded. "If grown-ups ask, I'm your nephew. And if someone asks too much, I don't answer. And if you feel uncomfortable, I tell you." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Good boy." Noah studied his face. "Are we running again?" The question broke something small and hidden. Elias brushed wet hair from his son's forehead. "Not today." Vale Tower received them through the side entrance. Elias kept Noah close, one hand on the child's shoulder, the other around his briefcase. The lobby staff were too well trained to stare openly, but curiosity moved like static across polished stone. A drenched consultant arriving with a child during a storm was not a scandal. Not yet. But Elias had survived by fearing what things could become. The private elevator opened before he pressed the button. Adrian stood inside. For half a second, no one moved. Noah looked up first. Children did not understand the politics of scent, but they understood presence. Adrian had suppressed his alpha pressure completely. Yet blood recognized blood in ways no law could define. Noah tilted his head with Elias's seriousness and Adrian's eyes. Grey, clear, unmistakable. Adrian's face did not change. And that was how Elias knew he had been struck. "This is my nephew," Elias said. Too quickly. Noah looked at him, then at Adrian. The elevator light cast a pale line across the child's cheek, in his yellow raincoat, with one sleeve slipping over his hand. He should have looked small. Instead, he looked impossibly composed, as if some old inheritance had settled in his bones before he was old enough to understand it. Adrian lowered himself slightly, not quite kneeling, but enough that his gaze no longer fell from above. "Hello?" he said. Noah considered him. "You're the man from TV." "Yes." "You look lonelier in person." Elias's fingers tightened on Noah's shoulder. Adrian went very still. The elevator remained open. Rainwater dripped softly from Elias's coat onto the marble floor. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled over the city, and the building lights flickered once before steadying. Noah frowned a little, as if trying to solve something difficult. "Your smell is quiet," he said, "but it hurts." Elias felt the world fall away beneath him. "Noah," he whispered. The child immediately lowered his head, chastened not by fear but by the knowledge that he had broken a rule. Elias wanted to lift him, hide him, flee with him through the emergency stairwell, and never stop moving. Adrian looked from Noah to Elias. Not triumph, not accusation. Recognition, raw enough to be almost unbearable. "You're wet," Adrian said after a long silence. It was the wrong sentence, or perhaps the only survivable one. Elias swallowed. "We only came to sign the revisions." Adrian stepped back inside the elevator, creating space, then come upstairs. Every instinct screamed, no. Noah's hand slipped into Elias's again. His palm was warm, small, alive. Elias entered. The doors closed on the lobby. The storm, and the last clean distance between them. Upstairs. Adrian led them not to the conference room but to a private lounge adjoining his office. It was warmer there, with low lamps and a grey sofa facing the rain-dark city. A staff member appeared with towels and hot water, then vanished after one look from Adrian. No questions, no lingering. Elias knelt to remove Noah's wet shoes. His hands shook only once, when Noah leaned forward and whispered, "Did I do bad?" "No," Elias said, too softly for anyone else to own the answer. "You did nothing bad." Adrian stood near the doorway, his posture controlled with visible effort. He watched Elias dry the child's hair, watched Noah submit to the care with sleepy trust, watched the small domestic rituals of a life from which he had been absent. For 6 years, Adrian had searched for a vanished Omega. He had imagined fear, illness, poverty, even death. He had not imagined this: a child lifting his arm so Elias could pull off his raincoat. A child with Adrian's eyes pressing his cheek into Elias's sleeve as if that sleeve were home. Noah fell asleep before the documents arrived. It happened gradually. His head lowered against Elias's arm. His lashes fluttered. His body gave one small, exhausted shiver. Elias shifted him onto the sofa and covered him with Adrian's spare coat before realizing whose coat it was. He reached to remove it. "Leave it," Adrian said. Elias froze. Their eyes met across the sleeping child. For once, Adrian's face had no command in it, only restraint, stretched thin over something breaking. "He gets cold easily," Elias said before he could stop himself. Adrian looked at Noah. "So did you." The room became silent. Elias's breath caught. Adrian did not move closer. He did not need to. The sentence had already crossed every distance Elias had tried to preserve. "I don't know what you mean," Elias said. Adrian's gaze remained on the child. 6 years ago, in the hotel near Westbridge, you asked for another blanket but refused to admit you were shivering. Elias stood very slowly. The rain pressed against the windows like 1,000 fingers. Adrian finally looked at him. "You said your name was Wren." Elias felt the old name enter him like a blade, warmed by memory. Wren had been frightened. Wren had been foolish. Wren had woken before dawn with bruised lips, a feverish body, and the scent of an alpha clinging to him like a future he could not afford. Wren had disappeared because Elias did not yet exist, and Noah did not yet have a heartbeat strong enough to terrify him. "People say many things at night," Elias replied. Adrian's voice roughened. "And leave before morning." "Yes." Elias held his gaze. "Sometimes that is how they survive." The answer struck its mark. Adrian looked as if something inside him had stepped back from anger and found guilt waiting behind it. Before he could speak, the lounge door opened. Marcus Hale entered with a tablet in hand and stopped immediately when he saw Noah asleep on the sofa. His eyes moved once to Adrian, then to Elias, then away with professional discipline. "Sir," Marcus said, "Madam Helena has requested confirmation regarding the child." Elias went cold. Adrian turned his head. The alpha pressure that entered the room was not loud. It was worse, precise. Lethal. Stripped of every social courtesy. What? Adrian said. Did you tell her? Marcus lowered his eyes. Nothing. Noah stirred in his sleep. Elias moved instinctively, placing himself between the child and the door. Adrian saw it. In that moment, more than the eyes, more than the age, more than the scent. Elias's fear told him the truth, not all of it. Enough. Adrian looked at Marcus. No one approaches them. No one reports on them. No one uses the child's name outside this room. Yes, sir. And Marcus, the security chief, looked up. If my grandmother already knows, find out who told her. After Marcus left, Elias picked up Noah with careful arms. The boy murmured and tucked his face against his shoulder. I'm leaving, Elias said. Adrian did not stop him. That should have relieved him. Instead, it hollowed him out. At the door, Adrian spoke quietly. Elias. He had never said the name like that before, as if he knew it was both true and not enough. Elias did not turn. Adrian asked, Is he mine? The question did not sound like accusation. It sounded like a man standing at the edge of a life he had lost before he knew it existed. Elias held his sleeping son closer. After a long moment, he said, He is mine. Then he walked out. Behind him, Adrian remained in the warm room with the small wet shoes Noah had forgotten beneath the sofa. He stared at them for a long time, those tiny shoes with rainwater still darkening the soles, and understood that the past had not returned as a ghost. It had returned breathing. The first car appeared outside Noah's school on Tuesday. It was not the kind of car that belonged on that street. The Eastern District carried its age openly, narrow sidewalks patched in uneven stone, rain gutters that overflowed after every storm, bakeries with faded awnings and apartment windows crowded by laundry racks. Parents arrived on foot, on scooters, in dented taxis, balancing umbrellas and lunch bags while calling children back from puddles. The black sedan waited across from the preschool with its engine off and windows tinted too dark to reflect anything but sky. Elias saw it before Noah did. He did not stop walking. Stopping was an admission. Instead, he adjusted the strap of Noah's backpack, crouched to retie a shoelace that had not come undone, and used the lowered angle to study the license plate through the rain-beaded fence. Temporary registration, clean tires, no neighborhood permit. Papa, Noah said, patient but suspicious. My shoe was already tied. I know. Then why are you doing it again? Because I'm nervous. Noah's small face changed. He had Adrian's eyes, but Elias silences. In other children, fear rushed outward in questions. In Noah, it folded inward, becoming stillness. Are we running today? He asked. Elias finished tying the lace with fingers that did not shake. Not today. The same answer as before. He hated how thin it sounded now. He took Noah inside, signed him in, spoke calmly with the teacher, and left through the side gate instead of the main entrance. The sedan remained in place. No one stepped out. No camera flashed. That would have been easier to confront. Power rarely announced itself when it could teach the air to feel watched. By the time Elias reached Vale Tower, he had identified 3 possible routes for disappearance and rejected all of them. The first was too familiar. The second required forged medical transfer documents he had not updated in 9 months. The third meant leaving the city before the South Harbor filing closed, which would immediately expose him to breach claims and freeze half the money he had saved under the Rowan identity. 6 years ago, he could vanish with 1 bag and a feverish body because he had nothing except fear. Now he had Noah's school drawings on the refrigerator, a pediatrician who knew his allergies, a rented apartment with height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe. A life was harder to burn than a name. The morning working session began without Adrian. 3 Vale directors sat opposite Elias, their expressions too polite. One of them, a narrow-faced alpha named Victor Sloane, smiled as Elias entered. He belonged to Helena's branch of the family by marriage, though his official title said only senior legal advisor, Mr. Rowan. Victor said, "We were beginning to wonder whether the weather had delayed you. I was 3 minutes early. Then perhaps it was your expression that arrived late." No one laughed. That made the comment worse. Elias placed his documents on the table. "Shall we discuss the trust conversion?" Victor leaned back. "Actually, before that. The Family Council has asked for clarification regarding your conflict disclosures. My disclosures were submitted with my onboarding documents." "Yes, and they were remarkably brief." Victor slid a folder across the table. "No family ties. No prior employment under another designation. No medical limitations that might affect contractual capacity. Very tidy." Elias did not touch the folder. "Is there a question?" he asked. Victor's smile deepened. "Only whether tidy things are always true." A cold line traveled down Elias's spine. The other directors remained quiet, but their eyes shifted toward him with a new kind of attention. Not professional skepticism, social appetite. They smelled weakness without knowing its shape yet. And old families loved nothing more than turning hidden lives into public leverage. Before Elias could answer, the conference room door opened. Adrian entered with Marcus behind him. The room changed at once. Even Victor straightened. Though he tried to disguise it by adjusting his cuff, Adrian's gaze moved over the folder. The directors. Elias's untouched hands. His face remained calm, but the air around him tightened. "I don't recall assigning this review," Adrian said. Victor stood. Madame Helena requested preliminary clarification before the afternoon council call. "Madame Helena does not manage my consultants. The acquisition involves family assets. The acquisition involves my signature." Adrian looked at the folder again. "Take that with you when you leave." Victor's mouth thinned. "Adrian, with respect, no." One word, no raised voice. No visible anger, yet the authority in it closed over the room like a hand. Victor picked up the folder. He passed Elias without looking at him. But Elias caught the faint trace of his pheromones, sharpened citrus over something bitter. Annoyance. Calculation. A man who had not won today and had already begun planning tomorrow. When the room emptied, Adrian did not sit. "Did they approach you before this?" he asked. Elias gathered his papers. "Your family has many ways of approaching people without appearing to move. That is not an answer. It is the only one you have a right to." Adrian absorbed the rebuke without flinching. That irritated Elias. He wanted Adrian angry. Wanted him cold. Wanted every old instinct confirmed. Instead, the alpha looked at him as though every defensive word was another locked door he had earned. "I told Marcus to remove surveillance from the school." Adrian said. Elias's fingers tightened around a document. "So you knew." "I found out this morning. And I'm supposed to thank you for controlling a threat your name created." "No." The simplicity of the answer disarmed him more than denial would have. Adrian stepped closer, stopping at the far side of the table. He did not cross it. That distance, deliberately maintained, was almost cruel in its consideration. "I'm speaking to Helena tonight," he said. "Until then, change your route home. Marcus will provide a list of streets without family security presence." "I don't want Marcus near us." "He doesn't have to be near you to be useful." "Useful to whom?" Adrian's jaw shifted once. "To Noah." The name struck the room bare. Elias looked up. Adrian did not apologize for saying it. He only looked back. And in his eyes, Elias saw the thing he had feared most, not certainty, not triumph, but a tenderness being held down by force because it had no permission to exist. "You don't get to use his name," Elias said. A shadow passed over Adrian's face. "Then tell me what I'm allowed to do." "Nothing." Adrian was silent for a moment. That may not be enough to keep him safe. It kept him alive for 6 years. And alone with every danger. Elias laughed once. Softly, without humor. "You think your world would have been safer?" "No." Adrian's voice lowered. "Not anymore." The answer unsettled everything. Elias left before the silence could become something worse. That evening, Adrian went to the Old Vale residence for the first time in 4 months. The house stood on a private hill above the financial district. All pale stone, iron gates, and windows lit like watchful eyes. It had survived scandals, wars between branches, and 3 generations of alphas who mistook inheritance for destiny. Adrian had grown up there, learning that affection could be scheduled and punishment could be delivered as etiquette. Helena received him in the winter room, where the fireplace was lit despite the warm season. Portraits lined the walls, stern men, beautiful women, children dressed like miniature judges. The Vale bloodline preserved itself in oil paint before it preserved itself in people. "You dismissed Victor," Helena said. "I dismissed a nuisance. You used to have more patience for family procedure. I used to have less reason not to." Helena poured tea without asking whether he wanted any. "So it is true." Adrian remained standing. "Be precise." The consultant, the child, the scent traces Marcus tried to erase from internal reports. She lifted her cup. "You were always thorough. But grief made you sentimental. Sentiment makes men careless." The fire crackled between them. Adrian said, "What did you know 6 years ago?" Helena's eyes did not leave his face. "About what?" He let alpha pressure enter the room slowly. Not enough to crush. Enough to strip courtesy from the walls. "Do not waste my time." For a moment, she looked almost proud. Then she set down the cup. "We knew there was an Omega near you." The words landed without drama. That made them worse. Adrian's hands remained at his sides. After Westbridge, before, a soundless pressure built behind his ribs. Helena continued. "Your father's death left the council unstable. You were resisting the marriage arrangement with the Marlowe branch. We allowed some distractions because men under pressure often require them." "Distractions." The room narrowed. "What did you do to him?" Adrian asked. To the Omega, Helena's expression remained composed. "Nothing directly. We investigated. He had no family protection, no registered bond, no political value. If he became pregnant, the child would belong to the Vale line by blood and legal petition. The Omega himself would have been settled comfortably somewhere private." Settled comfortably somewhere private. A cage described in silk. Adrian heard Elias's voice from the train station of memory before the train station had even happened. "Trust requires safety." Helena watched him carefully. "He disappeared before we confirmed conception. Very clever. If desperate. For years I wondered who warned him." No one warned him. Adrian's voice was almost unrecognizable. He was simply better at surviving than we were at hunting. Helena's face cooled. "Do not romanticize evasion. If that child carries your blood, he carries responsibility greater than one Omega's fear. He is a child. He is an heir. He is not yours." At that, Helena stood. The fireplace threw her shadow long across the carpet. Everything born from this family belongs first to the family. You may hate the language, but you have benefited from it every day of your life. Adrian looked at the portraits on the wall. For the first time, they did not seem ancestral. They seemed like witnesses who had never intervened. "I am ending the council's access to the acquisition," he said. "You cannot." "I can. You will fracture the company." Then it was already rotten. Helena's expression sharpened. "Do not mistake guilt for virtue. The Omega lied to you. He hid your son." Adrian turned back to her. "Because we taught him what my name meant." Helena went still. He left without touching the tea. Across the city, Elias was packing. Not everything. Never everything. Running required mercy toward objects. The more sentiment one tried to save, the slower one became. He packed passports, cash, a suppressant vials, Noah's medical file, 2 changes of clothes, a small stuffed rabbit with one ear worn thin, and the emergency phone sealed beneath the loose floorboard under his bed. Noah sat on the mattress in pajamas, watching. He had not asked questions at first. He had folded socks into uneven pairs with great seriousness. When Elias opened the hidden compartment, Noah's eyes lowered. "So we are running," he said. Elias stopped. Rain tapped the apartment window. The room smelled faintly of laundry soap, old wood, and the soup they had not eaten. On the refrigerator, Noah's drawing of 3 birds under a crooked umbrella trembled whenever the heater clicked on. "I don't know," Elias said. It was the first honest answer he had given all day. Noah hugged the stuffed rabbit to his chest. "Is it because of the lonely man?" Elias sat beside him. "His name is Adrian." "Do you hate him?" The question was too large for a 5-year-old mouth. Elias wanted to say yes. It would have been clean. He wanted to say no. That would have been dangerous. In the end, he brushed his thumb over Noah's hair and said nothing. For so long the child leaned against him. "I was afraid of the people around him," Elias said at last, "and I was afraid he would become like them if I stayed." Noah considered this with painful seriousness, but he told the angry smell man not to say my name. "Yes." That was good. "Yes. Then maybe he can do one good thing and still not be safe." Elias closed his eyes. There were days when Noah's gentleness frightened him more than any alpha bloodline. Before dawn, they left through the back stairwell. Elias wore plain clothes and a cap low over his face. Noah carried the rabbit inside his backpack, silent with sleep and trust. The streets were nearly empty, washed clean by night rain. They took 2 buses, then walked 6 blocks to the old northern train station, where cameras were unreliable and cash tickets still existed for regional routes. At Cinch, Obtsprzeche, Elias bought 2 tickets under a name he had not used in 4 years. At Cinch Doazech, Shishase. Adrian found them on platform 7. He did not arrive with security. No black sedan. No visible guards. No command, spreading ahead of him like smoke. He came alone, coat damp from rain, hair slightly disordered, breath controlled but not calm. Elias saw him from across the platform and felt, absurdly, as if the city had exhaled his name. Noah noticed him too. "Papa," he whispered. "I know." Adrian stopped several feet away, far enough not to trap them, close enough to be heard beneath the announcement echoing through the station. "Elias," he said. "Move aside. I'm not blocking you. You are—" Pain crossed Adrian's face and disappeared. "My grandmother knew about you before I did." Elias's grip tightened around the suitcase handle. Adrian continued, voice low. "She investigated you 6 years ago. If she had found out about the pregnancy, She would have taken the child and confined you somewhere private. I didn't know. That does not make me innocent. The platform speakers crackled. A train was delayed. Somewhere. A child cried, then quieted. Elias looked at him with a face gone white and unreadable. Why are you telling me this? Because you were right. That was the first thing Adrian gave him with both hands and no defense. You asked why I didn't trust you, Elias said. His voice did not break. But something beneath it had. Trust requires safety. You were never safe. Adrian, your house, your name, your silence. I had one night with you and woke up carrying a future your family would have turned into property. Adrian lowered his eyes. It was not submission. It was recognition. Noah stood half hidden behind Elias, watching with the solemn cruelty of children who see more than adults intend. Adrian slowly bent down until he was at eye level with him. Elias almost stepped back. But Adrian did not move closer. Noah, he said, quiet as rain. Noah's small fingers curled into Elias's coat. Adrian swallowed once. I will not take you anywhere. I will not make your papa go anywhere. If people with my name frighten you, I will stand in front of them. If I frighten you, I will leave. Noah studied him for a long time. Even if you're my father, he asked. The station noise seemed to vanish. Elias stopped breathing. Adrian's face changed. Not much. Just enough for devastation to become visible through control. Yes, he said, especially then. Noah looked up at Elias. Papa. Elias could not answer. His throat had closed around 6 years of running. The train arrived with a scream of metal and wind, pulling rain mist along the platform. Doors opened. People moved around them, dragging luggage, lifting children, carrying ordinary lives toward ordinary destinations. Elias stood still. Then his phone vibrated. A project alert flashed across the screen. Urgent internal audit has flagged unauthorized data transfer linked to consultant IDE. Rowan. Access suspended pending investigation. A second message followed. Legal hold issued. Do not leave jurisdiction. Elias looked at the screen. Adrian saw the color drain from his face. What happened? Before Elias could speak, 2 uniformed transit officers appeared at the end of the platform with a veiled legal liaison walking behind them. Not family security. Official enough to be seen. Clean enough to deny. The liaison smiled politely. Mr. Rowan, he called. There seems to be a matter of corporate theft we need to discuss. Elias looked at Adrian then. For the first time since his return, suspicion did not shield him quickly enough. Hurt reached his eyes first. Adrian understood before Elias said a word. The trap had closed. The platform did not become chaotic. That was the cruelty of well-designed power. No one shouted. No one grabbed Elias by the arm. The transit officers approached with the careful expressions of men who preferred paperwork to violence. And the veiled legal liaison carried a tablet beneath one elbow as if he had merely arrived to correct a misplaced signature. Around them, passengers continued boarding the train, umbrellas dripping onto polished concrete, children complaining about wet socks, the morning announcement breaking and reforming overhead in a distorted female voice. Elias stood with Noah behind him and understood that the trap had been built for public cleanliness. If he resisted, he would become unstable. If he ran, he would become guilty. If he surrendered, Noah would see him taken. Adrian moved first. He stepped between Elias and the liaison with no visible haste. Yet the space changed instantly. The officers stopped because their bodies understood what their uniforms had not been prepared for. Adrian did not release pheromone pressure. He did something more frightening. He looked at them as if he already knew the names of their superiors, their debts, and the mistakes they had made when they believed no one important was watching. "This is a corporate matter," Adrian said. "You will not involve a child on a public platform." The liaison's smile held. "Mr. Val, with respect. The consultant is under a legal hold issued by Vale Group's internal compliance office. We were asked to ensure he does not leave the jurisdiction before questioning. I am Vale Group, not in compliance procedure, sir." The sentence was smooth enough to reveal whose hand guided it. Helena would never send a fool. She preferred useful men with soft voices and clean fingernails. Men who could perform disobedience while pretending loyalty to structure. Elias felt Noah's fingers clutch the back of his coat. Adrian did not look at them. Perhaps he knew that if he did, Elias might see too much. "The complaint is suspended pending my direct review. I'm afraid the filing has already been entered." "Then unenter it." The liaison's smile faded by one careful degree. That would require board authorization. The train doors began closing behind them. Wind pushed against Elias's soaked trousers. For one wild instant, he imagined lifting Noah and forcing his way through the nearest door before it sealed. But the officers had shifted without appearing to move, enclosing the platform exits in a geometry of polite control. Noah whispered, "Papa." Elias's hand found his son's without looking down. "It's all right." The lie sounded thin, but Noah held on to it. Adrian turned slightly. Not enough to expose his face fully. "Marcus is outside the south entrance. Go with him." Elias stared at the back of his head. "No." "Elias." "No." This time the word cut. "I will not hand my child to another person under your command while your company accuses me of a crime." Something in Adrian's shoulders tightened. He absorbed the blow because he deserved it, and because this was not the place to bleed. The liaison watched them with bright interest. He had come for evidence. And pain was a kind of evidence if handled correctly. Adrian understood that too. His voice cooled. "Then, Mr. Rowan will return with me to Vale Tower for questioning. The child will remain with him. No officers are needed." The liaison hesitated. "Madam Helena, does not appear on Vale Group's operating charter." Adrian finally turned his head fully, and the look he gave the man was almost gentle. "Say her name again in a corporate matter, and I will make sure every illegal family instruction you have ever obeyed becomes discoverable before lunch." The officers looked away first. The liaison lowered his tablet. Elias should have felt relief. Instead, as they left the platform under Adrian's protection, every step tasted like surrender. At Vale Tower, the investigation unfolded with ceremonial cruelty. Elias was placed in a glass-walled compliance room on the 32nd floor, where the blinds could turn opaque from outside but not from within. Noah sat beside him with a box of colored pencils someone had brought too quickly, as if even the kindness had been prepared in advance. The boy drew nothing. He only held the blue pencil in one hand and watched the adults with his serious grey eyes. Across the table, two compliance officers read the allegations. Unauthorized transfer of confidential acquisition files. False professional history. Concealment of material conflicts. Potential use of a minor connected to a Vale bloodline for leverage. Each phrase had been chosen to stain more than one part of his life. Elias listened without interruption. His hands folded, while the person he had become over 6 years was dismantled into suspicious clauses. Adrian stood outside the glass for the first 10 minutes. Then he left. Elias saw him go and felt the room grow colder. It was irrational. Adrian's presence did not make him safe. Adrian's name had dragged them here. Adrian's blood had turned Noah from a child into an object of litigation. Yet when the Alpha disappeared down the corridor without looking back, a familiar lesson returned with merciless clarity in the end. Powerful men always left the room before the harm became visible. "Mr. Rowan," one officer said, "can you explain why encrypted files from the South Harbour Trust Review were accessed from your consultant credentials at 3:17 this morning? I was at home. Can anyone verify that?" Elias looked at Noah. The officer's eyes followed. Elias's expression emptied. "My son was asleep." "Your nephew, according to your earlier statement." The blue pencil snapped in Noah's hand. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. Elias turned toward him at once. "Noah." The child looked down at the broken pencil with a face too still for his age. Color had risen faintly along his cheeks. Not from shame, but from pressure. The room carried too many adult scents. Too much restrained alpha authority from the hallway. Too much fear Elias could not fully hide. "I'm okay," Noah said. No one believed him. Elias reached for the broken pieces and set them aside. "He needs air." "We're not finished," the officer said. "My child needs air." The officer glanced toward the opaque glass, as if asking permission from someone unseen. That glance told Elias everything. Adrian had left. But the room was not empty of watchers. Helena's people were embedded wherever procedure could be turned into a leash. Elias stood. "You can continue after he rests. If you refuse to cooperate, I'm refusing to let you frighten a child to improve your report." The room went silent. Then the door opened. Not Adrian. Victor Sloane entered with a thin folder and a sympathetic expression polished to shine. "Mr. Rowan," he said. "No one wishes to distress the boy. In fact, some of us are deeply concerned about his well-being." Elias felt the air sharpen. Victor placed the folder on the table but did not open it. "A temporary guardianship review may be necessary if your legal status becomes unstable, only as a protective measure." "Of course." Noah slid closer to Elias without a word. Elias put one hand lightly on his son's shoulder. "Get out." Victor's smile remained. "You should be careful. Hostility rarely helps Omega parents in custody considerations." There it was. Not nephew. Not beta. Not consultant. Omega. The word entered the room and stripped Elias naked without touching his skin. One compliance officer looked down. The other stared before remembering professionalism. Noah did not understand the full legal weight. But he understood enough. His small body stiffened beneath Elias's hand. Elias's voice became very calm. "Who authorized you to access my medical designation?" Victor lifted one shoulder. "You are using suppressants strong enough to endanger yourself. One could argue that concealment itself presents a risk to the child." The door opened again. This time, Adrian entered. Victor turned, irritation flashing before obedience could cover it. "Mr. Vale." We were in the middle of. Adrian crossed the room and took the folder from the table. He opened it. "Read one page." Then another. No one spoke. Elias watched his face and found nothing there that could save him. No anger. No tenderness. No apology. Only the CEO of Vale Group assessing damage. Then Adrian closed the folder. "Mr. Rowan is suspended from the South Harbour project pending investigation," he said. The words struck with perfect public force. Elias looked at him. For a moment, Adrian's eyes met his. Something moved there, buried too deep for anyone else to read. But Elias had no strength left for hidden meanings. He had spent 6 years surviving what powerful people meant beneath what they said. Victor smiled faintly. Adrian continued. "His access credentials are frozen. All contact with project personnel will go through legal channels. He is not to leave the city until the audit concludes." Noah made a small sound. Elias did not look away from Adrian. If he looked down, he might break. "Understood," he said. His voice did not tremble. That was the last pride he had. Adrian's hand tightened once around the folder. Then he turned to Victor. "You will report directly to me on this matter." "Of course. And if you reference Mr. Rowan's designation again without legal necessity, I will remove your license before the custody court has time to enjoy your performance." Victor's smile died. The threat should have meant something. It arrived too late. That night, Elias returned home with Noah in silence. Marcus drove them because Adrian had ordered it. And Elias allowed it because refusal would have required energy he no longer possessed. The apartment looked smaller when they entered, as if fear had followed them inside and taken up space in the corners. Noah removed his shoes carefully, lined them by the door, and went to wash his hands without being told. Elias stood in the kitchen, holding the edge of the counter. His phone contained 6 legal notices, 3 frozen accounts, 1 message from the preschool requesting an urgent guardian meeting, and no message from Adrian. Noah came out in pajamas after his bath. Hair damp, rabbit tucked beneath one arm. He stood at the kitchen entrance watching Elias pretend to read documents. "Papa," he said. Elias closed the phone. "Yes. If someone has a father, does that mean the father can leave whenever grown-ups get angry?" The question entered him quietly and did more damage than all the legal accusations. Elias crouched, but not quickly. His body felt as if it belonged to someone older. "Noah, I'm not asking because of me," Noah said, with the careful dignity of a child trying not to cause pain. "I'm asking because you looked like that happened before." Elias could not answer. Outside the apartment door, in the dim hallway where the old light flickered every few seconds, Adrian stood with one hand raised and did not knock. He had come with evidence. Not enough. Not yet. But a thread, the access logs, had been forged through an internal server controlled by Victor's office. The timestamp overlapped with a family security override. Helena's legal foundation had drafted an emergency custody template before the audit notice was issued. Adrian had come to tell Elias that the cold words in the compliance room had been a shield. Ugly but necessary. Meant to keep Victor close and evidence closer. Then he heard Noah's question. And Elias's silence. Adrian lowered his hand. Through the thin door, he heard Elias finally speak. Voice rough enough to reveal the wound beneath every controlled hour of the day. Some people leave because they don't know how to stay safely. Some leave because staying would hurt more. And some... He stopped. Noah asked, "What about him?" A long silence followed. "I don't know yet," Elias whispered. Adrian closed his eyes. He had once believed searching was proof of devotion. He understood now that a man could search for 6 years and still arrive as danger. He could stand outside a door with answers in his hand and still be the reason the people inside flinched at footsteps. He left the evidence packet at the threshold and walked away before either of them could hear him. By morning, the packet was gone. Elias found it when he opened the door at dawn to check the hallway. No note. No explanation. Only documents sealed in a plain envelope. The relevant lines marked with Adrian's precise handwriting. Victor's office. Family override. Custody template. Dates that proved the theft accusation had not followed suspicion. It had been created to justify taking Noah. At the bottom of the final page, Adrian had written one sentence. "I will end this without asking you to trust me first." Elias read it 3 times. Then his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown legal number. He answered without speaking. A woman's voice, cool and formal, came through the line. "Mr. Rowan, this is the family court clerk. You are being notified that an emergency custody petition has been filed regarding the minor child, Noah Rowan, also identified as a potential Vale bloodline heir. A preliminary hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning." Elias looked toward the bedroom, where Noah still slept beneath the grey coat Adrian had left behind. For 1 second, the apartment was utterly still. Then something inside him went quiet in a way fear had never managed. "Send me the address," he said. The family court did not look like a place designed to separate children from their parents. It had pale walls, warm lamps, a row of potted plants near the windows, and a painted mural of birds above the reception desk. The softness made Elias feel sick. Cruelty, when dressed as care, was harder to resist because it demanded gratitude before obedience. He stood beneath the mural with Noah's hand inside his own and watched strangers read their names from a screen as if a life could be called forward by appointment number. Noah wore the navy sweater Elias had saved for school ceremonies. His hair had been combed carefully, though one piece still refused to lie flat near his temple. He had not complained since waking. Not when Elias burned breakfast. Not when the taxi drove through traffic for almost an hour. Not when security asked him to remove the small rabbit from his backpack and pass it through the scanner. That silence frightened Elias more than tears would have. Adrian arrived 7 minutes before the hearing. He came alone. No assistance. No security line. No visible armor except the black coat folded over one arm and the unreadable calm of a man who had spent the night deciding which parts of his life to destroy. The waiting room changed when he entered. Conversations thinned. A clerk looked up, then quickly looked down again. Even the opposing legal team, seated near Helena Vale, adjusted their posture without meaning to. Elias did not move toward him. Adrian accepted that from across the room. His eyes lowered briefly to Noah. Not with claim, not with hunger, but with a restraint so severe it seemed painful. Noah noticed. He stood closer to Elias, then hesitated, as if remembering the promise made on the station platform. Helena watched all three of them with patient interest. She wore ivory today, a color that made her appear less like a matriarch and more like a grieving elder dragged into public duty. It was beautifully done. Beside her sat Victor Sloan, his injured pride hidden beneath professional concern, and two family attorneys with faces trained to pity the person they intended to erase. When the doors opened, Elias felt Noah's fingers tighten. "It's all right," Elias said. Noah looked up at him. That's the fine voice again. Elias almost smiled. Almost. The hearing room was smaller than expected. There was no jury. No dramatic gallery. Only a judge. Clerks. 2 tables. And enough empty chairs to make absence feel like witness testimony. Elias sat with a legal aid attorney who had received the documents less than 12 hours earlier and whose kindness could not compensate for unreadiness. Adrian sat apart from both sides at first. Though everyone knew he was the center of the storm, the petition began politely. Noah Rowan, minor child, potential biological relation to Adrian Vale, concerns regarding guardian identity concealment, unstable legal history, possible corporate misconduct, medical designation, suppression, and exposure to flight risk. Each phrase was spoken in a level voice by Helena's attorney. A woman with silver-rimmed glasses and an expression of regret so perfect it felt rehearsed before a mirror. Elias listened with his hands folded beneath the table. He had learned long ago that visible anger cost Omegas more than it cost anyone else. Anger became instability. Silence became guilt. Tears became manipulation. Every possible reaction had already been translated into evidence against him before he entered the room. So he gave them nothing except the straight line of his back and one hand resting near Noah's knee. Then they showed the school records. Not because the records proved harm. They did not. Noah had perfect attendance except for illness, strong evaluations, and no behavioral concerns. That was precisely why they used them. The attorney praised Elias's care first, then turned praise into a cage. A child so gifted, so sensitive, so clearly marked by high alpha inheritance, required resources beyond a single Omega living under an assumed history. The word Omega entered the room softly, like a hand placed on the back of a neck. Adrian's eyes lifted. Helena did not look at him. The judge asked whether paternity had been established. Helena's attorney replied that a test had not yet been conducted because Mr. Rowan had concealed the child. Elias's attorney objected to the framing. The judge sustained the objection but wrote something down. That small movement of pen against paper made Elias's stomach tighten. Procedure did not need to hate him. It only needed to record him imperfectly. Then Victor was called. He spoke with gentle precision. He described inconsistencies in Elias's consultant records, unauthorized access logs, and Elias's attempt to leave the jurisdiction after being notified of internal review. He did not say escape. He did not need to. The word hung behind every sentence, like a shadow with teeth. Elias looked at Adrian then. Adrian did not look back. That hurt more than Elias had prepared for. Noah shifted beside him. The room had grown heavy with competing scents, alpha restraint. Old family pheromones masked beneath expensive blockers. Human anxiety. Bitter coffee. Polished wood. Children were not supposed to sit in rooms where adults spoke of them as inheritance. Noah's breathing changed first. Shallow and quiet. Elias felt it through the small knee pressed against his leg. "Noah," he whispered. "I'm okay." Noah said. He was not. Helena's attorney placed a final document before the judge. Given the uncertainty surrounding Mr. Rowan's identity and the ongoing corporate investigation, the Vale family requests temporary protective custody or, at minimum, immediate shared guardianship under supervised transition. This is not punitive. It is to ensure the child's safety. Elias stood before his attorney could stop him. The judge looked over her glasses. "Mr. Rowan, sit down unless you are instructed to speak." Elias remained standing. His voice was quiet, but something in it made even Victor turn. They are frightening him. The judge's expression softened by a fraction. The child may wait outside if needed. "No," Helena said gently from the opposite table. "With respect, Your Honor, the child's reaction may itself be relevant. A high-line alpha child without proper familial guidance can suffer under suppressed environments. This only proves the need for intervention." Noah made a sound like he had swallowed a sob by force. Adrian stood. The pressure in the room shifted so abruptly that the clerk dropped her pen. It was not an uncontrolled alpha release. Adrian was too disciplined for that. It was something colder command stripped of performance. The old Vale bloodline turning not against the weak but against its own house. "That is enough," Adrian said. The judge's face tightened. "Mr. Val, you are not currently testifying." "I am now." Helena's eyes sharpened. "Adrian." He did not look at her. He stepped toward the center of the room and placed a sealed drive on the clerk's desk. The corporate theft allegation against Elias Rowan was fabricated. Access logs were routed through an internal server controlled by Victor Sloan's office under a family security override. The emergency custody petition was drafted before the alleged breach occurred. Medical designation records were obtained without consent through a private clinic previously funded by the Vale Family Foundation. The room went utterly still. Victor rose halfway. "This is outrageous." Adrian finally looked at him. "Sit down before I add intimidation of a protected witness to the packet." Victor sat. Helena did not move. Her face remained composed, but the air around her had gone thin. For the first time since Elias had known of her existence, the old woman looked not defeated, not frightened, but inconvenienced by the truth arriving too early. Adrian continued, each sentence precise enough to cut legal flesh. 6 years ago, members of my family investigated an unbonded Omega connected to me. Their internal correspondence discussed possible confinement if pregnancy was confirmed and bloodline petition if a child resulted. Elias Rowan did not hide Noah for financial leverage. He hid him because my family had already built the cage. Elias could not breathe. Not because he was shocked. Some part of him had known. Fear had always been more intelligent than hope. But hearing it said aloud, in a room of strangers, turned private survival into public evidence. His life split open under fluorescent lights ran. Elias. Omega. Parent. Liar. Victim. Witness. None of the names protected him from being seen. Noah began to cry. It was not loud. That made it worse. His face crumpled silently. His small hands pressed against his ears, as if he could shut out the adult world by force. A faint wave of immature alpha distress trembled through the room. Untrained and raw. Elias turned at once. But Adrian was closer. He moved without thinking. In one step, he was between Noah and the room. His body angled to block the sight of Helena. Victor. The attorneys. The judge. All of them. He did not touch the child. He lowered himself to the floor instead. One knee against polished wood, placing his own body beneath the level of Noah's fear. Noah, he said, voice low, look at me only if you want to. Noah shook harder. Adrian lowered his gaze. Then don't. Listen instead. No one here gets to decide that you are a thing to be taken. Not them. Not me. Blood does not give anyone the right to terrify you. The room held its breath. Elias stood frozen. One hand still stretched toward his son. Something inside him gave way, not forgiveness. Not trust. Not even relief. It was the collapse of a belief he had used to survive that Adrian's power could only become a hand around their throats. Noah slowly uncovered one ear. Adrian did not smile. Your papa is here. Noah looked past him. Elias came around the table and knelt, gathering the child into his arms. Noah pressed his face into his shoulder and finally cried like a child. Messy and exhausted. No longer trying to be brave for adults who had never deserved his courage. The judge called a recess. No one argued. In the hallway afterward, Elias stood near a window with Noah asleep against his chest. His legal aid attorney had gone to review the evidence. Helena had been escorted into a private room with her counsel. Victor was nowhere visible. Adrian remained several feet away, as if distance were the only apology he could offer without asking for one. For a long time, neither man spoke. Rain moved down the courthouse glass in thin, patient lines. At last, Elias said, "Why did you search for me?" Adrian looked at him. The question had waited 6 years to become simple. It no longer carried accusation alone. It carried exhaustion, grief, and something more dangerous than either. Adrian's answer came quietly. Because the world became quiet after you left. Elias closed his eyes. It was not a confession. A confession would have asked for response. Forgiveness. Warmth. This asked for nothing. That was why it hurt. By late afternoon, the court denied the Vale family's emergency custody request and granted Elias temporary protective status pending full review. Noah would remain with him. No paternity testing would be ordered without a separate petition and child welfare assessment. The corporate allegations were referred for independent investigation. It was a victory shaped like a wound. Elias left the courthouse without looking for Adrian. Only when he returned home and Noah was asleep beneath the grey coat again did he turn on the news. The headline was already everywhere: Adrian Vale resigns from Vale family board amid internal misconduct scandal. No statement. No public appearance. No explanation beyond a short legal notice confirming immediate separation from family governance. Elias stared at the screen. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in years, the silence that followed did not feel safe. It felt like someone had walked into the dark alone. Adrian's penthouse had never looked like a place where someone lived. It occupied the highest residential floor of a tower overlooking the river, with windows tall enough to turn the city into scenery and rooms arranged with the flawless taste of a man who had paid others to imagine comfort for him. There were no abandoned cups, no books left open face down, no coat thrown over a chair because its owner expected to return tired and careless. Everything had a place. Everything looked as if it could be photographed for a magazine, and no human trace would need to be removed. Elias stood in the entrance hall with the spare key Marcus had delivered in a sealed envelope. He should not have come. That had been the first sentence in his mind when he opened the envelope. It had remained there through the taxi ride, through the elevator's silent ascent, through the moment the door unlocked beneath his hand. He had no obligation to look for Adrian. He had no duty to comfort the man who had arrived 6 years late. Survival did not owe tenderness to remorse, and yet he had come because Noah had asked. Very quietly after dinner, "Is the lonely man alone now because of us? Children should not have to carry adult guilt." Elias knew this. He had kissed Noah's forehead, told him no, tucked him beneath the blanket, and waited until the child's breathing deepened before taking the key from the kitchen drawer. Now he stood inside Adrian Vale's home and felt, with a strange ache, that wealth could be another form of abandonment. A folder lay on the console table. Elias recognized Adrian's handwriting on the label Rowan Trust Transfer. Beneath it were legal documents assigning a portion of liquid assets into an independent trust for Noah's education, healthcare, and future housing. Adrian was not named as trustee. The appointed managers came from a child welfare foundation with no Vale family connection. There were clauses preventing Adrian himself from using the trust as leverage for visitation, custody, or paternity rights. Elias read the first page twice, then a third time, more slowly. It was not a gift. Gifts could become chains. It was not an apology. Apologies demanded a listener. It was a structure designed to remove Adrian's money from Adrian's hands before it could become a weapon. The precision of it made Elias's throat tighten in a way anger could not. On the second folder, Adrian had written "Clinic records sealed, complaint filed." Inside were copies of legal actions against the private clinic that had leaked Elias's designation and suppressant history. There was also an affidavit from Adrian himself admitting that Vale family pressure had created conditions that forced Elias into medical concealment. The language was formal, almost cold, but the consequence was not. Adrian had written himself into the record as the source of danger. Elias closed the folder carefully. A hallway led toward the study. The door was half open, and warm light spilled across the floor. Elias moved toward it without removing his coat. The study was the only room that did not feel staged. Paper covered the desk, the shelves, the low table near the window. Maps were pinned along one wall. Not decorative maps, but city grids, rail lines, hospital zones, old shelter networks, and immigration office locations marked in careful ink. File boxes filled the floor. Some labels were dates. Some were names. Some were only question marks. In the center of the desk lay a photograph turned face up beneath a paperweight. Elias stopped breathing. It was him. Not Elias Rowan. Not the polished consultant in charcoal suits and silver glasses. Not Noah's calm father who knew how to speak to school administrators without trembling. The photograph showed Ren, young and sleeping, wrapped in an oversized white shirt near a rain-blurred window. His face was partly hidden, but Elias knew the line of that hand, the vulnerability of that turned shoulder. He remembered waking in that room alone with the strange certainty that if he stayed until Adrian opened his eyes, he would no longer be able to leave. He touched the edge of the desk but did not pick up the photograph. 6 years of search records surrounded it. False sightings in southern clinics, a shelter intake record under a similar name, a hospital birth list with 3 pages of crossed-out possibilities, payments to investigators, notes written at 3 in the morning, if the slant of the ink meant anything. 1 page contained nothing but a sentence repeated twice, then struck through. Do not turn him into prey. Elias sat down slowly in the chair before his legs failed him. He had imagined Adrian searching. Of course he had. Fear had imagined it first, Adrian's people hunting him down, extracting Noah's blood, wrapping court orders around his throat. Later, in weaker hours, loneliness had imagined it differently. Adrian standing in train stations, asking strangers about a vanished Omega with winter cedar in his scent. Elias had hated himself for those hours. Hope was humiliating when it had no evidence. Now the evidence lay everywhere, and it did not free him. It only made the past more complicated. A key turned in the front door. Elias stood at once. Adrian entered without surprise, as if some part of him had known Elias would come and another part had refused to hope for it. He wore a dark sweater instead of a suit, his hair damp from rain, his face stripped of the executive stillness that had made entire rooms obey. Without the board, without the family seal, without the office tower rising beneath him like a throne. He looked younger and more exhausted. His eyes moved from Elias to the study behind him. You found it, Adrian said. Elias's voice came out quieter than intended. You kept a photograph of me sleeping. Yes. Why? Adrian placed his keys on the console table. The small sound echoed in the too-clean room. At first, because it was the only proof I had that you were real. And later, because I needed to remember that I had once been trusted by someone who left before I learned what trust meant. Elias looked away first. The city beyond the windows glittered in broken fragments, every light doubled by rain on the glass. For a while, neither of them moved closer. Distance had become their shared language. Elias understood now that Adrian was waiting for permission to cross even a few steps of polished floor. You resigned. Elias said, yes. From the board, from the family governance structure, the inheritance council, and all voting trusts connected to Helena. My corporate role remains for now because too many employees would be harmed by an abrupt collapse. How practical. Adrian accepted the edge in his voice. I am trying to become less destructive, not less useful. That answer settled between them, too honest to dismiss. Elias folded his arms around himself. Do you expect gratitude? No. Forgiveness? No. Then what do you expect? Adrian's gaze lowered for a moment. Not in shame alone, but in discipline, as if the desire to ask for more had to be physically restrained. Consequences. Elias almost laughed. But the sound would have broken in the middle. That is a strange thing to want. It is the only thing I have earned. The words should have satisfied him. Instead, they made the anger inside him lose shape. Elias had carried fury like a blade for 6 years, sharpening it whenever fear softened into loneliness. He had needed Adrian to remain simple, powerful, dangerous, ignorant, because ignorance had protected him. But the man before him did not ask to be simple. He stood among the evidence of his own failure and did not cover it. That was harder to hate. You would have failed me, Elias said. Adrian looked at him. If I had stayed 6 years ago, Elias continued, voice steady because it had gone past trembling. You would have tried to protect me in the way your family taught you. You would have hidden me somewhere beautiful. You would have called it safety. You would have thought giving orders meant taking responsibility. And I would have disappeared inside your care until even I forgot the difference between being loved and being kept. Adrian did not defend himself. Yes, he said. The answer stole something from the room. Elias stared at him. That easily? No. Adrian's throat moved. Not easily. But truth does not become false because it humiliates me. For the first time that night, Elias saw the wound beneath Adrian's control, not the elegant sorrow of a man who had lost something precious, but the harsher grief of recognizing he might have destroyed it if given the chance. There was no romance in that. Only responsibility. I left because I was afraid, Elias said, but not only because of them. Adrian's hands tightened at his sides. Elias forced himself to continue. I was afraid that if I told you, and you looked at me the wrong way, I would still want to stay. I was carrying a child. I could not afford to be weak enough to love someone unsafe. Rain slid down the window behind Adrian like a curtain being lowered. You were not weak, Adrian said. You don't get to absolve me either. I know. A silence followed, but it was different from the old ones. Less like a wall, more like two people standing on opposite banks of a river, seeing at last how deep the water had always been. Elias drew a breath. Noah asked about you. Adrian's face changed before he could stop it. Hope, quickly suppressed. Fear, slower to leave. What did he ask? Whether you were alone because of us? Adrian closed his eyes. He should not think that, he said. I told him he shouldn't. Thank you. He also drew something. Elias reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. It had been pressed there by Noah's careful hands before Elias left. As if the child had understood more than either adult could bear. Adrian took it only after Elias extended it fully. The drawing showed 3 figures under one large, crooked umbrella. One figure had glasses. One was small and yellow-coated. The third stood slightly apart. Tall and dark. Half beneath the umbrella and half in the rain. Above them, Noah had written in uneven letters, "You can stand here if Papa says yes." Adrian held the paper with both hands. For a long time, he did not speak. When he finally did, his voice was rough. He is kinder than I deserve. He is not a reward, Elias said. I know. He is not proof that the past can be repaired. I know. He is a child. Adrian. If you enter his life and leave damage behind, I will not let blood or regret save you. Adrian looked at the drawing again. Good. The answer was so quiet that Elias almost did not hear it. Good. Not because he welcomed punishment, but because Noah had someone who would choose him without hesitation. Because Elias's refusal was not cruelty but protection. Because love, if it was to exist here at all, would have to kneel before that protection and wait. Something in Elias's chest loosened painfully. He looked toward the study, at the maps and files and the photograph. I hated you for searching. Adrian nodded once. And I hated you when I thought you had stopped. The admission entered the room before Elias could take it back. Adrian looked up. There it was, the most shameful part of survival. The childlike wound beneath all the adult logic. Elias had run because he had to. He had changed names, crossed cities, swallowed suppressants until his hands went numb. Yet in the fevered months after Noah was born, when the baby slept against his chest and the world smelled of milk, and medicine, and rain, Elias had sometimes listened for footsteps that never came. He had feared being found and grieved not being found in the same breath. Adrian did not move closer. His restraint was almost unbearable. I am sorry. he said, not grandly, not beautifully, just the words, finally placed where they belonged. Elias covered his eyes with one hand, then lowered it before weakness could become habit. Come to dinner tomorrow. Adrian stilled, not as Noah's father. Elias said, not as CEO, not as someone buying forgiveness with legal documents. As what? Elias looked at him across the quiet, rain-lit room. As yourself, if you know who that is without a throne. Adrian's face held more emotion than Elias had ever seen on it. And still he did not reach for more than he had been given. I'll come, he said. Elias walked to the door. Adrian followed at a distance, stopping before the entrance hall narrowed. When Elias stepped outside, he turned back once. Adrian. Yes. Noah likes sweet corn soup. Don't bring expensive gifts. Don't wear a suit. A faint, fragile change touched Adrian's mouth. Not quite a smile. Something learning how. All right. The door closed between them. Inside, Adrian stood in the empty penthouse holding a child's drawing under the soft white light. Outside, Elias waited for the elevator with his hand pressed against his coat pocket, where the warmth of the paper had already gone. For the first time in 6 years, leaving did not feel like running. Adrian arrived for dinner holding nothing. That was the first miracle. Elias had warned him not to bring expensive gifts, and powerful men tended to interpret warnings as negotiations. Yet when Noah opened the door, Adrian stood on the threshold in a dark knit sweater. No swit, no bodyguards, no branded bag, just rain on his shoulders and a paper sack of corn from the old market because Elias had mentioned sweet corn soup. Noah stared at the bag with suspicion, then at Adrian's shoes. You didn't bring a car into the hallway, Noah said. No. Good. Cars are too big for hallways. Adrian considered this seriously. I'll remember. Elias stirred soup in the kitchen and heard the exchange, his hand stilling on the ladle. It was absurd that this ordinary sentence could hurt more than courtroom testimony. Adrian removed his shoes without being asked, placed his umbrella in the corner after checking with Noah where wet things belonged, and entered the apartment like a man crossing a border. He looked too large among narrow furniture, too quiet beneath crooked refrigerator drawings. Yet he did not make the room bend. He let himself be fitted into it. Dinner was awkward. Noah watched Adrian eat each spoonful, as if testing whether rich alphas knew how to swallow common food. Adrian accepted the examination with grave patience. Elias sat opposite them, tired from legal calls, alert to every change in scent and posture. Nothing happened. No disaster broke through the window. Adrian did not mention paternity, custody, money, or regret. He asked Noah about school only after the child mentioned a science project. And when Noah answered in 3 careful words, Adrian did not pry for 5 more. After dinner, Noah brought out a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Adrian studied the scattered pieces, then turned one blue fragment between his fingers. This belongs to the sky. No, Noah said. It's part of the train. Adrian examined it again. You're right. Elias looked down before either of them saw his expression. There were forms of gentleness that felt more dangerous than cruelty because they gave the heart unreasonable evidence. Adrian could have corrected a boardroom without blinking. Here, before a child and a damaged puzzle. He yielded over a piece of cardboard as if the matter deserved respect. Elias understood then that if affection returned, it would not return as fire. It would come in small, unbearable revisions. Weeks passed, not smoothly, but with fewer knives hidden beneath the table. Adrian came on Thursdays first. Then Sundays when Noah asked whether the lonely man was busy. He learned that the apartment heater clicked twice before turning on, that Noah hated carrots unless cut into stars, that Elias could appear calm through almost anything except a school fever call. He never arrived unannounced. If Elias said no, Adrian accepted no so completely that sometimes Elias found himself angry at the lack of argument. The world outside remained less kind. Vale Group endured investigations, resignations, and headlines polished by lawyers until truth became market language. Helena withdrew from public view but not from influence. At Noah's school, one mother asked whether Elias regretted denying the child his proper place. Elias looked at her until her smile failed, then replied that children were not luggage misplaced in the wrong house. Adrian found out because Noah mentioned at dinner that Papa's voice had gone quiet sharp near the school gate. Later, while Noah brushed his teeth, Adrian stood by the sink and asked, "Should I do something?" Elias wiped the table slowly. "No." "All right." That easy answer struck a raw place. "You don't even know what I mean by no." Adrian held a chipped bowl he had washed with too much concentration. "I know it means you don't want me to punish someone because my pride dislikes their words. I know it may not mean you don't want support. So I'll wait until you tell me which it is." Elias had no reply to that. Outside the kitchen, Noah hummed through toothpaste. Off-key and unconcerned, Elias took the bowl from Adrian, dried it, and placed it in the cabinet. Their hands brushed once. Neither moved away quickly enough. The small contact remained between them long after their skin parted. The final attack came in autumn, when the city smelled of wet leaves and cold stone. A children's welfare charity invited Elias to speak at a fundraising event because his legal case had become, in public phrasing, a landmark discussion of guardian autonomy and designation privacy. Elias almost refused. He disliked turning wounds into stages. But the charity had helped Noah's trust managers protect other unbonded families. Refusal would have been easier. Ease had not saved him before. The ballroom was bright with chandeliers and polished voices. Adrian arrived beside him, but half a step back. Elias wore a dark blue suit, silver glasses, no scent blocker strong enough to hurt him. His designation was no longer a secret dragged into court. It was simply one part of his body, and his body belonged to him. They were halfway through the reception when Helena's last remaining allies moved. A journalist asked whether accepting support from Adrian after years of concealment made Elias's independence questionable. Another asked whether his consulting success had benefited from the Vale air scandal. A third wondered whether a child might one day resent being kept from his lineage. The questions were knives wrapped in velvet, designed to make anger look like guilt. Adrian shifted beside him. Elias touched his wrist once. "Wait." Then he turned toward the cameras. "I built my career before the public knew my child's name," Elias said. His voice carried, not loud, not trembling. "I raised my son without Vale money, Vale housing, or Vale protection. When the Vale family attempted to use power against us, the court record showed who endangered whom. If anyone here still believes a parent surviving quietly is less respectable than a family inheriting loudly, that is not a question for me. It is a confession from you." The ballroom went silent. Adrian looked at him then, and for once he did not hide what the sight did to him. Pride, tenderness, grief, all held behind restraint because Elias had not asked to be turned into an altar. Cameras flashed. Applause rose uncertainly behind them. Elias did not smile. He did not need it to make the sentence true. Later, in the car, rain began again. Elias watched water gather on the windshield, body exhausted from public composure. Adrian sat beside him, with his hands loose on his knees. For most of the ride, neither spoke. At the apartment entrance, Adrian walked him upstairs. This had become usual, though he never crossed the threshold unless invited. Elias unlocked the door, paused, and saw the old instinct waiting goodbye before intimacy became dangerous. Retreat before wanting could show its face. Adrian stood in the hall, coat damp. Eyes lowered from asking, Elias said, "You can stay until morning." Adrian's gaze lifted. "Not like that," Elias added, because some old wound still needed the sentence spoken. "No assumptions." "No assumptions," Adrian said. Inside, Noah had fallen asleep on the sofa with a book open on his chest. The apartment smelled of steamed rice, crayons, and the faint lavender soap Noah used. Adrian removed his shoes. Elias took off his glasses and rubbed at the bridge of his nose, suddenly too tired to perform strength. "Tea?" Adrian asked. Elias gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You know where the cups are." It was not a declaration. It was not forgiveness. It was a man allowing another man to move through his kitchen at midnight without fear. In another life, perhaps romance would have arrived more beautifully. In this one, it came as Adrian boiling water quietly, while Elias carried Noah to bed, as the hallway light falling over three shadows, as a cup placed beside Elias's hand without demand. Noah woke when Adrian adjusted the blanket over him. His eyes opened halfway, blurred with sleep. "Dad," he murmured. The apartment stopped breathing. Adrian froze, one hand still above the blanket. Elias stood in the doorway, his pulse turning once. Painfully, Noah did not seem aware of the wound and gift he had placed in the room. He only shifted deeper into the pillow, lashes lowering again. Adrian looked as if the smallest movement might shatter him. Elias walked over and touched his wrist, not to restrain him, to bring him back. "Don't make him regret it," Elias said quietly. Adrian swallowed. His voice, when it came, was almost nothing. Never. That night, Adrian slept on the sofa under a quilt too short for him. Elias lay awake in his own bed for a long time, listening to rain touch the window and Noah's breathing from the small room next door. He thought of Westbridge, the train platform, the courtroom, the penthouse full of maps. Pain did not vanish because someone finally learned gentleness, but it changed shape. It loosened from a command into a memory. Near morning, Elias rose for water and found Adrian awake on the sofa. Staring at the ceiling, "The quilt is too small," Elias said. "Yes. There's another one in the closet. I didn't want to open things." Elias stood there in the dim light, barefoot, hair loose, no armor arranged yet for the day. After a while, he took the second quilt from the closet and placed it over Adrian himself. Adrian did not catch his hand. He did not turn the gesture into more than it was. That, somehow, made Elias remain a moment longer. "Sleep," Elias said. Adrian closed his eyes. Years later, the rain still came often. It darkened the windows of their larger apartment near the river. The one Elias chose, and Adrian entered only after every document made ownership clean. It filled mornings with silver light and gave Noah excuses to forget umbrellas at school. It softened the city that had once been built from escape routes until streets became simply streets again. On one such evening, Elias stood in the bedroom doorway and watched Adrian kneel before Noah with a tie hanging crooked between them. Noah, nearly 10 now, complained that school ceremonies were invented by adults who liked uncomfortable clothing. Adrian listened with the solemn attention he gave all of Noah's grievances, then demonstrated the knot again. "Not too tight," Elias said. Adrian glanced over. "I know." Noah grinned. "Papa says that because you look tragic when concentrating." "I do not look tragic." You look like a CEO whose soup burned." Elias laughed before he could stop himself. Adrian looked at him then, and the room warmed around that glance. There were still days when old fear returned, when Elias hated closed doors, when Adrian went quiet after legal letters. Healing had not made them innocent. It had made them careful. Noah ran ahead to find his school jacket, leaving the tie half-finished around his collar. Adrian stood, one knee cracking softly, and crossed to Elias with the kind of patience that had taken years to learn. "Are you ready?" he asked. Elias looked toward the window. Rain slid down the glass in bright, familiar lines. Once, rain had hidden him. Then it had chased him. For a long time, every storm sounded like a train departing. Now, from the hallway, Noah shouted that if they were late, he would blame both adults equally. Elias reached for Adrian's hand. "Yes," he said. They left together. The umbrella opened above the three of them at the building entrance. Large and slightly crooked, Noah walked between them, complaining about puddles while deliberately stepping into every one. Adrian held the umbrella too high for Elias's liking. Elias corrected the angle with a quiet touch. Their shoulders brushed, stayed, moved forward. The rain did not end. It simply no longer meant leaving.